Okay. Getting a volume on that and all that. Volume? Are you seeing the...
Yeah.
Okay, so we are live then?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, sorry for the little glitch. I did not know how to get us fired up there, but it looks like we've got it taken care of. Well, today we're going to talk about uh, green. We don't call it Yom Kippur because the Kippurim. The difference is singular. Kippurim is plural. And it's plural, as I spoke last week, because it is eternal. Yom Kippurim will go on for all eternity. It does not stop at the end of this world or something like that. But that's why it's put in plural in biblical Hebrew. That's not the only reason why things are put in plural, but that's why this one in particular is in plural. So it goes on and on and on. It doesn't stop for any reason. That's a good thing to know. But it is many things. It is a feast of covering. Kippah, that's a covering. Kippur, Kippurim, that can be anything. Your house is a covering. It covers you from the hot sun. It covers you from the rain. A porch that has a topper over it can be a covering. A tent can be a covering. Lots of things can be a covering. In fact, when you're buried in the ground, the dirt can be a covering. And that may sound morbid, but it is taking me in the direction that I want to take this today because of all the things that Yom Kippurim is, it's a celebration. It's a time of self-reflection. It is a time of judgment. It is a time of terror for some. It is a time for complete celebration for others. But it is also a time to die. Not physical death, not a spiritual death. It is a time to die to yourself. And today, that's going to be our focus about dying to ourself. It particularly during Yom Kippurim. I want to get to the verses that are important here. We're going to begin with Leviticus chapter 23, verse 27. And if you can stand and cover yourselves for the reading of the verses. If you can't do that, then don't. Don't stand up and then fall face forward and wind up in the hospital. This is just tradition. It's not a law. All right. It says, Ach be'asor lachodesh ha-shevi'im hazeh yom ha-kippurim. See, it's in plural. Hu mikra kodesh yiyeh lachem v'initem et nafshotechem v'hikravtem ishe la Yahweh. And so, of course, you may be seated at this point. There's some important words here, some things that really stand out in my mind. And we have this Be'asor. That's just surely, certainly, hey, no doubt, things like that. In the 10th new moon, the Chodesh, you remember that from last week, on the 7th day is a day of coverings, atonements, redemptions. It is from the root kafar, which is to cover over. Whence a covering? To cover over, to overspread with anything as with pitch. Like the roof on the houses back then, or the pitch they put over their tents in some cases. And they say it's to cover sins. Of course, the Western world makes that to pardon sin. You can look at it that way, but that's not really what that's about. your sin is always with you. Moshe is still a murderer. David is still a murderer. He's still an adulterer, still a womanizer, because that stuff doesn't go away. It is with you always. All the sin that you have committed is with you always. What is different is that God has provided a covering. And the covering is what, if you will, hides your sin. Now, it's not that God doesn't know that you sinned. It hides let's say it doesn't hide your sin, it hides your guilt. Let's put it that way. Let's see, what else? This is a holy convocation. This is where we get together and we'll be talking about that. What is that, Tuesday night this week? Tuesday night at 7, same channel, same place, right? But the word in this verse that really, it says, it will be to you, Yeh lechem v'initem. It will be to you what? Basically a time to look in the mirror, to bestow labor upon anything, to exercise oneself in anything, to till the ground, to bring the earth into cultivation, to be afflicted, depressed, oppressed. That's so Western and so not Bible. It's because the English Bible was translated, they use the word afflicted and oppression and stuff like that. And no, this is a time of tearing into our mind, our spirit, our soul. In Hebrew, all being one and the same thing. It's not bullet points. It should never be taught as bullet points. When it says love God with all your heart, soul, and strength, those are not three different things. They are exactly the same thing. It's three different ways to say the same thing because it's adding emphasis. So you should never teach that in a bullet point way. And it's the same thing here. When we start talking about this time of reflection, this time of affliction, of depression, oppression, it's not what we think in the Western world. We're not oppressed by God. We should not be depressed at this time, but we may have to suffer that when we start thinking about what we've done this year, what we told God we would not do last year at this time, and seeing our failure, it can make us depressed. But that's not how it's being used here. It's of the looking into our soul and tearing into it and being fully and completely honest with ourselves. That's why they use this word. If you're not going to be honest with yourself, this is a lesson in fiction. This is a waste of time. This is, go find something better to do, right? Because this isn't good enough for you, I guess, right? And I'm trying to paint as clear a picture as I can. And of course, it says, Fesh is the root word. I had stopped saying, what's a root word here? I shouldn't have read the Hebrew. That's your soul. That's the thing that makes you who you are, the thing that lives on after the body gives up the ghost, if you will. It's the real you. And what's the point in tearing into the real you if you're just going to lie to yourself about it? And that's the tendency people have. They want to see everything in the best light possible. When you tell a story, you're always the hero in the story, no matter how bad you acted, right? You put a spin on it, right? This isn't the time for that. This is the time to be brutally honest. And then it's saying the hik rav 10 and draw near. It is to approach, to come near. God is said to draw near when he aids the afflicted. But it says draw near with esh, that being your root word. Remember what the here? It's This is the word that mimics the sound of fire. And so when it's of a person and it's talking about you, you're drawing near to God with passion. Because it does say Yahweh. That's your next word. Last word in this case. Some flowery translation, surely on the 10th day of the 7th month, there will be a day of coverings. It will be a sacred assembly, a time to tear into, cultivate, and humble your souls, drawing near and offering passion to Yahweh. So that's coming up this Tuesday at 7 p.m. So we make sure everybody knows for sure what you're getting yourself into. It is the celebration of the day that we entered into Nisoin, which is the consummation phase of our marriage with God. This is going all in. This is giving up your life to live God's life. So maybe to help us better understand this, let's look at something. We don't know who this person was that wrote this letter. It was written in Hebrew by a Jewish rabbi. He did not sign it. That was common back then. So we don't know who wrote it. But he wrote, "For where there is a covenant, death is necessary to establish the testator." Now this confuses some people. The testator is the person who made the covenant and has died. It is not the person who, oversees what happens to the person's goods afterwards. The person who makes the covenant and dies, that's the testator. He went on to say, "For a covenant is enforced upon death. Otherwise, it has no strength while the testator is alive." The writer is not telling us that the Yehudim, the Jews, made wills, and upon the death of the testator, the will was enforced. That is not what this man just said. The writer is simply telling us that a covenant was not entered into until an animal was sacrificed. Now remember, this is 2,000 years ago that he's saying this. Oh, goodness. Sometimes I just can't hang on to stuff, even a piece of paper. Sorry for all the noise. Now he goes on and he says, "Therefore, without blood, initiation could not begin." So in order to enter into a sacrifice in their time among the Jews, and again, 2,000 years ago, an animal had to be sacrificed, which meant they were going to have a barbecue. They're going to sacrifice, they're going to cut up the animal. That's the sacrifice part. But then they're going to put it on a barbecue pit, cook it, and everybody involved in the covenant is going to eat. So if we called it barbecue, people would be a lot less afraid of the Bible, I'm just saying. Then he said, "For when all the commandments had been proclaimed according to the Torah by Moshe, to all the people, he took the blood of calves with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, sprinkling both the scroll and all the people." So you see where's the covenant? The covenant's the scroll. And this man in the 2nd century, who we don't know who he was, wrote this. Then he said, "And Moshe took the blood," of course he's quoting the executive. I think that must be Exodus. 24:8. And he says, "And Moshe took the blood and sprinkled the people and said, Behold, the blood of the covenant," which he had just sprinkled, that scroll, "which Yahweh cut with you, and concerning all these words." So the cutting of the animal so that the blood was shed and the animal would be cooked so the people could eat. But the words concerning these words that were written in the actual witness to the covenant. It's not really the covenant. The covenant has to be on the heart, but it's the witness. Then he said, "And also the Mishkan, or the tabernacle, he sprinkled with the blood, and almost everything is purified by blood according to Torah. And without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness." Interesting way to put that. Therefore, it was necessary that the pattern of things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly with better sacrifices than these. For the Mashiach is not entered into the Kodesh HaKadashim, the Holy of Holies, as it's called these days, made with human hands. The Mashiach's not entering the temple, if you will. He's not entering the tabernacle. He's entering the Holy of Holies in heaven, because it's not made by human hands. Or well, I shouldn't say in heaven. I should say the tabernacle that is not made with human hands. Let's put it that way. The figures of the true, but into the heavens itself, the presence of God now manifests for us. Nor that he should repeatedly offer himself as the Kohen Hagadol entered into the Kodesh HaKadashim, so the high priest into the Holy of Holies, yearly with blood of others. Otherwise, he must repeatedly suffer from the foundation of the world. Now he has appeared once in the end of the world to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. So, yes, this is New Testament. Sorry, I didn't mean to trick you, Jewish followers. I'm Jewish. I'm a follower. Listen, I have to start off with this with the Jews. If Yeshua is not Mashiach, then every prophet in our Jewish Bible was a false prophet. And in particular, Daniel and Yirmiyahu, who gave the exact time. Because that exact time in the first century. And there was no one else who gave himself as an offering. No one but Yeshua. So you're going to have to come to terms with that. You're going to have to come to grips with it. Either the entire Jewish religion is a completely false one based on the words of false prophets, or Yeshua was in fact God in human flesh. And the reason why we're all so terrified by it is because pagan philosophers took the words written by Jewish rabbim and perverted them in their translation such that you can't even see the Judaism in it hardly anymore. You have to search for it. But these men were well trained who wrote this. Whoever he was, I don't know who he was. People say it was Luke. Other people say it was Mark. Other people say it was whoever. Doesn't make any difference. He was obviously a Jewish rabbi. He obviously recognized that God had come in human form. He did not know about the Trinity. He didn't know about the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. None of that existed in his time, so he would not have known any of those things. None of the Catholic stuff that was mixed into the pot, if you will, when they translated. He didn't know any of those things. All he knew was when God came back, it was God. God said himself with his own lips, he said, I am Yahweh, and other than me, there is no salvation. So, if God comes to this earth in human form, which the prophet said he would, behold, a child is born, a child is given, his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Prince of Peace, the Almighty God. Is that not in complete harmony with what God himself said? So the Jews of the first century fully understood that God was going to show himself in human flesh. What do they call that? All I could think of is epiphany. That's the wrong word. Theophany. Theophany. Either one would be right. So it's only a way of God showing himself in a way that we could see him and not die. Because if you fully looked into the eyes of God at being a human, you would just, melt. Your brain would just melt out of your ears or something. I don't really know, but you couldn't live through it. God told us that, so we know. But if he shows himself in human form, as he did with Joseph and some of the others, Well, then we can live through it, right? And so he could walk on earth just like the prophet said he would, exactly when the prophet said he would. Otherwise, everything about Judaism is false. And I'm not willing to give up my Judaism. I'm not willing to give up my heritage. I'm not willing to walk away from the God of my fathers just because somebody told us Jews that all of that stuff was false. No, we're going to have to reconcile at some point. Anyway, so this Jewish rabbi is trying to explain to us how that a man who appeared in how God appeared in the flesh of a human man, but was not from the tribe of the Levites, how that he could be the high priest. The tribe of the Levites were the high priest for the building here on earth. The high priest for the building that was not made by human hands is not limited to that. And that somehow confused the Jews of the time, and I suppose is still confusing until you figure that out. That was for the temple here on the earth built by human hands. God had no such limitation. And that's what this man just explained. And he's trying to make us understand that when God makes a sacrifice in the place that is not made by human hands, that is a better sacrifice. Not that what the pagans took that to mean was, oh, see, us Christians took over and the Jews are no good anymore and we're all going to do our own thing and now God can't tell us what to do because we live by grace and not by the law, right? No, none of that has anything to do with this. What this man said, that's a complete perversion of his teaching. That's a complete perversion of all of the Rabbim who taught that their work was gathered up in that New Testament stuff. And the rabbis that are running around bad mouthing it, saying, see, it's got this mistake and see, it's got that mistake, they're not qualified. Not one of them. Because if you were qualified, if you read the New Testament like I did, and you translated the entire text like I did, I translated the Greek. I did not translate the English. I didn't go in and read somebody's English translation. See, there, that's wrong. Well, of course it's wrong. It was intended to be wrong. But read the Greek. There's no Trinity in it. There's nothing in that isn't rooted and founded wholly in Judaism of the first temple period. It's all fully and completely in compliance with the Torah and Judaism of the time. But that's the only way you're going to know is if you do what I did. Or maybe if you read my translation when it comes out, which is pretty soon. All right, so he goes on, and inasmuch as it is apparent to me, or to men rather, wants to die, but after is judgment. Oh, this gets so messed up. Let's talk about what's being said here. If it's appointed to man wants to die, how is it that a couple of men in the Jewish Bible didn't? Oh, well, they're going to come back at some point and die. Why? Really? They're going to be sent from heaven back to the earth so they can die? Are you serious? There is no point in that. There is nothing that can be gained from that. The appointment to die is not physical. I'm going to let that percolate a second. It's appointed to man to die to himself. And that's what Yom Kippurim is about. One of the things, of course. It's about many things, but today we're focusing on that. You see, there's another verse in the New Testament, and I think Yeshua said it. I'm not positive. Can't remember everything. I translated the whole thing. I don't remember the whole, I don't remember every line or who said what, but I think it was Yeshua said, no greater love has any man than he lay down his life. And that has been turned into, I'm just going to go out and give up my life for some total stranger and I'm just full of love. No, you're not. You're stupid. You're very misguided. Let's put it that way. That's not what's being said. People who get married and have children, they'll get this. Others may not. Others may struggle with it. But if you've gotten married and you've had kids, in particular the wife, some guys, but mostly the wife, she's going to totally get what it means to die to herself. You see, teenagers don't get it. They don't understand that their parents have given up their lives for the sake of the kids, teenagers and younger. You almost have to be married and have your own kids to totally and fully understand what your parents gave up. They gave up new cars. They gave up fancier houses. They gave up newer furniture. They gave up going out to eat and hanging out with their friends. They gave up, uh, if they're a farmer, they gave up that nice new tractor. They gave up that better barn. Why? Because they're taking all of that money that would have gone there and they're spending it on those children. Those children don't get it. They don't know what the medical bills cost and what the insurance for those, that medical bill costs and the cost of the occasional medicine that those children need and the doctor visits and all. They don't know that. They don't know how much it costs to feed them, especially when they're having those growth spurts and it's like they have two empty legs and they're trying to fill all of that up. Holy cow. Yeah, it's particularly with teenage boys. I never really noticed it so much with my sister. Me and my brothers, boy, there was just a never-ending well there that needed to be filled, and they don't get that the parents are giving up everything for these kids. Now I know that this younger generation, it's all about I got to have my me time and I got to blah blah blah. It's all about me, myself, and I. And so who cares about the kids? And then they wonder why the kids all have ADD. Whatever. I'm just saying, just throwing that out there. But my generation certainly understood it. We gave up everything for our children. And our children, those who grew up with that kind of thing, will probably give up everything for their children. And this is exactly what I'm talking about here. When it's appointed to man wants to die. Put my little piece of paper down. Let me look at my notes here. We die to our selfish desires. Our selfish desire, in particular, to be in control of our own life. Yeshua, God in the flesh, raised his physical body from death, but God did not die. He laid down his body, the temporary tabernacle that he, dwelt in while he was here. He laid that down and then he raised it right back up because he never died. And the writers of the New Testament letters never said God died. They never even implied it. It was not expressed or implied. God came to earth to sacrifice that body. And he sacrificed that body we think of on the cross and all that stuff, but really is that the sacrifice, or is it that his earthly physical desires were sacrificed? You see, he did not come here as a conqueror. He came here as a servant. He gave up his life to serve us, the very people that he created for himself. So we find it difficult to think of God as having wants, needs, and desires, but obviously he does. Think about it. Why would you create the heavens and thrones and streets of gold and all that other stuff that we associate with heaven if it wasn't something you wanted? Why would you create all of the animals that are described in various parts of the Bible and in various non-biblical sources? Why would you do that if you didn't need it, if you didn't want it, if you didn't desire it? Why would you create what the church calls angels, we call messengers? and all the different kinds, right? And why would you create humans? What on earth was that about? Well, we can understand from the story, the parable that's told and it is a parable that is told in Genesis, in Bereshit, to say it right. It says that at one point, God says, it is not proper for the man to experience loneliness. Well, what on earth and heaven would God have based that on? Be based on something. Oh, well, he knows humans. Let's go a little beyond that. That's pretty superficial, if you ask me. No, God's basing that on the fact that if it's not proper for a man to experience loneliness, that's based on the fact that it is not proper for God to experience loneliness because we were created in his image. Follow the thinking here? So God has wants, needs, and desires. And it was his desire to have a bride. And no, not just a single being, if you will. We can't comprehend why it would take a number of people that you'd be easier to count the stars than it would be to count the people that he wants to count as his bride. We don't get that. Some things we'll never get, and that should be okay with us. But this is all about this time when this covering, we walk underneath this covering. And what is that covering? It is the Torah. Pure and simple, it's the Torah. But what is it that we're doing? We're giving up our right, as we see it, to be in complete control of our lives. This very same, well, maybe not the same man, but someone who wrote very similar to this, so it could have been the same man. He wrote several times in his letters to the various congregations, not churches, but the Adat, the Jewish synagogues, if you will. He wrote that he was a slave to God. And that's really the right word, because what that word indicates is that you have no rights. You have no identity beyond what your master has given you. You have no right of choice beyond what the master chooses. So it's a slave in the most literal of senses here. Because he fully understood the idea of giving up his life to live out God's life. You see, and I've said this before, but if you're thinking about buying a home, how do you know if it's God's will? Well, that's very simple. You base it on the Torah. The Torah says that you have to pay 10% of your income. It also says you have to give extra money on the holidays, and you have to show up on the holidays, and you have to wear the fringe, and there's all these things, right, that you have to do. And so if you buying this house is going to make it such that, well, now you can't afford to go somewhere that you otherwise, go to your synagogue on those times that you were supposed to go, or that you can no longer pay your tithe or make your extra offerings. Because if you read the Bible, it's about 21, maybe 22% of our total income is supposed to go to God. It's not just the 10% that's on our income. It's the extra that we have to get beyond that. And it comes out to 21 or 22%. It kind of depends on how you interpret specific verses, but it's right in that area. And in Judaism, it has always been that way. So if we buy a house that ends our ability in any way to give those offerings and pay those tithes, or we buy a car or anything, that ends that ability. If we take a job that ends our ability to be in service on Shabbat, or to uh, participate in the holidays, then it's not God's will. It's that simple. And when we live our lives like that, we're laying down our life and living a godly life. And that shows God that there is no greater love in our life, because there's no greater love than we can give than to lay down our lives to serve Him. And our service to Him is whatever it is we do. If I'm a carpenter and I live out life according to His law, that is my service to Him. We've been over that already, and it's a good lesson to learn. But we're giving up our life. Now, some people give up their life for their job. That's it shows a lot of love for what you do, but it's very superficial in comparison to giving up your life for your children. And that's very superficial in giving up your life for God. Doesn't get any deeper than that. So anyway, back to his explanation of how God was making this sacrifice and all that. He said, thus also Mashiach was once offered to bear the sin of many. Now remember, sin, we know what that is. We know that it is, it's both Torah rebellion and Torah observance. It's the opposite, though. If the Torah says to do it and you don't, that's sin. If the Torah says not to do it and you do, that's sin. So you're better off doing what the Torah says and not doing what it says not to, and then you don't have to worry about committing sin, right? But he says he was once offered to bear the sins of many. For this reason, afterward shall he appear to those without sin who bind together with him. Get it now? If we live according, he says he's going to appear to those who are without sin. Does that mean that we've never sinned? No, that would be flawless. Sin is not about flawlessness. God is not expecting that from anybody. It's why when we mess up and we do commit a sin, God has made a way for us to correct that through offerings, through sacrifices, through apologies, through making things right that we've wronged, right? So that's not, don't take it that to that extreme, because it would be wrong. So afterwards, he will appear to those of us who live according to his Torah. That's what's being said, without sin, who live according to Torah, who bind themselves with him. How do you do that? You live according to the Torah. It's the same thing being said twice. It's called a doublet. Let me see what else I wanted to talk about here. And while I have to scroll forward here. I've already talked about all of that. Okay. And I do want to talk about the sacrifice of the one who gave his life for us. It's so much cross. That had so little to do with him giving his life for us. But we'll talk about it. In the letter written by Levi ben Yeshua, he said they stripped him and put on a scarlet robe, put a scarlet robe on him. They put a crown of thorns on his head and mocked him. The prophet said that would happen. They spit on him and hit him with a reed with their fist. The prophet said that would happen. But they took the robe off and put it back on him. They did that several times. Well, that was to reopen the wounds. It was for maximum effect. Dr. Truman described it in this way. The unnatural position made every moment painful. The lacerated veins and the crushed tendons throbbed with incessant anguish. The wounds, inflamed by exposure, gradually gangrened. The arteries, especially at the head and stomach, became swollen and oppressed with surcharged blood. And while each variety of misery went on gradually increasing, there was added to them the intolerable pain of raging thirst. As the arms fatigued, great waves of cramps swept over the muscles, knotting them in deep, relentless, throbbing pain. With these cramps comes the inability to push himself upwards. Hanging by his arms, the pectoral muscles and the intercostal muscles are unable to act. Air can be drawn into the lungs, but cannot be exhaled. Yeshua fights to raise himself in order to get even. Carbon dioxide builds up in the lungs and in the bloodstream, and the cramps partially subside. Spasmodically, he is able to push himself upwards to exhale and bring in the life-giving oxygen. Hours of this limitless pain, cycles of twisting, joint-rending cramps, intermittent partial asphyxiation, searing pain as tissue is torn from his lacerated back as he moves up and down against the rough timber. Then another agony begins. A deep crushing pain in the chest as the pericardium slowly fills with serum and begins to compress the heart. It is now almost over. The loss of tissue fluid had reached a critical level. The compressed heart is struggling to pump heavy, thick, sluggish blood into the tissues. The tortured lungs are making a frantic effort to gasp in small gulps of air. The markedly dehydrated tissue send their flood of stimuli to the brain. Once strength or feeling in the legs was gone, the victim would be unable to push up in order to breathe, and death would occur quickly. The Lord took the punishment of a broken covenant in our place, because that's what this was all about. That scroll that the blood had been sprinkled on had been broken. And if we recall, why was the sacrifice of animals made? Why was there so much blood? Why did it get all over the person who initiated? May the same thing happen to me that happened to that animal if I break this covenant. And from the cross, the very interesting thing was said. And no Greek speaking Roman would ever have known to write this. But the writer said that hanging from the cross, Yeshua said, Nishlam. Nishlam. And they translate that as, it is finished. And sadly enough, the philosophers took that to mean, see, now all that stuff with the Jews is over, and now we start this new thing with the Christians. And, more power to them. But that's not what the Rabbim who wrote this were saying at all. You see, when you say it is finished, you're basically saying it is, the covenant is now signed. You see, when you get married, this is a really, really good example here. There's the time of betrothal. There's the time of the courting and all that, which leads to the will you marry me? And then there's the betrothal. And then there's the period where you go through the whole ceremony, right? And you get this document of marriage. We call it a ketubah in Judaism. And Dawn and I haven't seen our document of marriage since we got married almost 38 years ago. Does that mean we're not married? No, that contract's still in place. Why? Because it lives here in our hearts. We're faithful to each other because we love each other. And we're still together because we love each other. Can we tell you why? Probably not. We just do. And that's a good thing. And yet I love her for a million different things. And I'm sure she's the same way with me. It's because our covenant is alive in our hearts that our covenant is unbroken. But this was a covenant between God and the Jews that had been broken because it did not live in their hearts. And so God promised, it's in Hosea, just go read it. He promised that he would win the Jews back, that he would get them to imprint that Torah on their hearts, that he would get them to lay down their lives to serve him. A good example of that would be Mother Teresa. She gave up everything she could have been and every place she could have gone and everything she could have done to take care of orphans. She died long before her body laid down to rest permanently, right? But this it covers, the two things. It covers the sacrifice that was necessary to reinstate that same covenant. God does not change, so his covenant will not change. His rules do not change. They never have, they never will, because God does not change. When God gave us the law, it was perfect, holy, and pure. And it says that a number of times in these New Testament letters, that it's perfect, holy, and true. And it never, ever pits the grace against the law like Christianity does. Those letters don't do that in the Greek. But the sacrifice, the physical sacrifice, all that was for was the reconciliation of the covenant. Where the real death occurred was when God gave up all of the glory that was the body he was in to tabernacle in a human body, and gave up all of the authority and all the power and all of the servitude that was toward him, and he became the servant. He laid down everything so that he could reconcile that covenant with his people. And his people, it's never been about a bloodline. The father of Judaism wasn't even a Jew. He was Hastai. He was a Chaldean. How did he become Jew? How did he become the father of the Jew? He laid down his life out God's will. That's how we become Jewish. We don't pick and choose. We don't say, well, I'll follow 9 of the 10 commandments. Well, I'll live out the laws that concern me, but I'm not going to worry about the priest's laws. They concern you. Just read them someday. You'll realize that has an impact on your life, that has something to do with you, and you are subject to it. You should probably know it. I'm just throwing that out there. Just saying. But there is no greater love that we can show to God than to lay down our lives in service to God. Well, that's really all I have to say for this subject today. I hope it's meant something to everyone. I hope I got my point across. I never know. But this Tuesday night, 7 p.m. Texas time, same place, same channel. Shabbat shalom, y'all.
The blessing, Be'ivrit. Yevarecha Yahweh v'yish merecha. Ya'er Yahweh panai v'lecha v'hunecha. Yisa Yahweh panai v'lecha v'yasim lecha shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare you for what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness, favor, and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate towards you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace because he is your friend. Amen.